Hey, welcome. So for a long time, most of us were taught that gender was pretty simple, right? You were either male or you were female. But for so many people, that just never really felt like the whole story. Today, we're going to dive into what it means to move beyond those two boxes and get a better handle on the reality of human identity. Okay, let's get into it.
So let's just start with this big question right off the bat. Are male and female really the only options we have? I mean, for centuries, that was pretty much the standard view. But as we all talk more and more about who we are, we're realizing that for a lot of us, that's simple binary. It just doesn't fit.
And that brings us to the core idea of this entire explainer. This quote right here, it's the key that unlocks the whole thing. Gender is not a strict binary, but a broad spectrum. This isn't about inventing something new. It's about finding better, more accurate words to describe what's always been there.
Okay, so let's actually break down what that means. What does it look like to see gender as a spectrum? We're going to explore this more inclusive and honestly more accurate reality.
So when we say spectrum, what are we even talking about? Well, it's pretty simple. It just means that gender exists along a whole continuum, a range of identities, not just in two separate little boxes. Think of it less like a light switch that's either on or off, and more like a color wheel with an infinite number of shades.
And you can see just how diverse that range is right here. Of course, tons of people feel a strong connection to being male or female, and that's fantastic. But for others, their identity might land somewhere in between those 2 points. For some folks who are gender fluid, that identity can actually shift and change over time. And then you have people whose identities are completely outside of those categories altogether, like agender or non-binary. Every single one is a totally valid way to be.
All right, let's build on that. This next part is, well, it's absolutely crucial. We're talking about the difference between your internal identity and your external expression. And spoiler alert, they are not the same thing.
So to really get this, let's make sure we're all on the same page with a few terms. First up, biological sex. This is probably the one we're most familiar with, right? It's the label, usually male, female, or intersex, that a doctor assigns at birth. It's based on physical things like anatomy and chromosomes. It's basically a medical classification. Gender identity, though, that's totally different. This has nothing to do with your body parts. It's all about what's going on inside. It's that deep down internal feeling of who you truly are. Now, for a lot of people, their gender identity lines up with the sex they were assigned at birth. That's what being cisgender means. But for a whole lot of other people, it doesn't. And that's why this distinction is just so important.
And the third piece of the puzzle is gender expression. So, if identity is how you feel on the inside, expression is how you show it on the outside. It's the way you present your gender to the world, through your clothes, your hair, the way you act, whatever feels authentic to you.
So here's the bottom line, the big takeaway from all this. How someone expresses themselves does not automatically tell you what their identity is. A guy can love wearing dresses. A woman can have short hair and dress in clothes from the men's section. Someone can look totally androgynous. And none of that tells you a thing about who they are inside. We just can't make assumptions.
Okay, to make all this feel a little less abstract, let's zoom in on one specific identity on that big spectrum we were talking about. Let's take a closer look at what it means to be non-binary.
So, non-binary, at its heart, is what we call an umbrella term. Think of it as a big, roomy category for anyone whose gender identity just doesn't fit into those strict, separate boxes of male or female. It's a word that creates space for everything that exists beyond that binary.
And under that umbrella, the experience can be really different from person to person. For some, being non-binary means feeling like they're somewhere between male and female. For others, it's something else entirely, completely separate. But the most important thing to get is that this is a real, deeply felt identity. It is not a trend, it is not a phase. And ultimately, every single person gets to be the expert on who they are.
So, why are we talking about all of this? Why is this understanding so important? Well, that brings us to our final section, why this matters. Because this isn't just an academic exercise in learning new words. It's about the kind of world we all want to live in. Because seeing gender as a spectrum has huge, real-world effects. First off, it creates space. It tells people whose identities have been ignored or even erased for centuries, hey, we see you. You're real. Second, it challenges these old, rigid norms, which pushes our schools, our jobs, our communities to be more welcoming to everybody. And finally, it fosters a sense of belonging. And let me tell you, being seen, being respected for who you really are, that has a massive positive impact on a person's well-being.
At the end of the day, you don't have to be an expert on this stuff. You don't need to have every single term memorized. The real goal here is just to be open. It's about being willing to learn a little,
to really listen when people share their experiences, and, most importantly, to just respect how they define themselves.
So I'll just leave you with this to think about. In a world that feels so complicated sometimes, with so much to disagree about, what if respecting someone's truth, their own sense of who they are, what if that's the simplest and kindest thing any of us can do?